Welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Coach Brad Wilson, and we're back. It's Friday, so we got Philosophical Friday rolling out. Duncan, how was your 4th of July?
Good. Welcome back, sir. Welcome back, everybody.
Thank you. It's good to be back. The break was well needed, feeling refreshed, energized, all the things. So yeah, since we have all this extra energy this week, tell us what are we going to dive into? What's the topic?
We're going to talk about a topic which I think is long overdue because it talks about poker influencers, and perhaps we're going to talk a little bit about cryptocurrency, which is I don't know why, but it goes side by side with poker somehow. People are very interested in that topic,
I actually think I know exactly where it came from. I think that Bitcoin, the utility for using Bitcoin in online poker was very, very high compared to other industries. And so poker players just naturally, you know, touched it a lot sooner than other people. So I think that's why like crypto and poker run side by side, just because of, the events of Black Friday and then the utility of Bitcoin as it relates to like cashing in and cashing out on online poker sites just meant that, poker players just, it was on their radar before most other people.
Absolutely. And to your point, as someone that has suffered tremendously with having problems cashing out all of the time, I was one of the people who very early on saw the utility in Bitcoin. Now, I have to make a disclaimer here. I see the utility in Bitcoin. I don't necessarily see any value as an investment vehicle. These are two different things. Something can have a utility, but something also may need to have what I would call intrinsic value. And on top of that, in order for something to be investable, need to be, for me, at least that's my own personal definitions. That's the disclaimer. That's my bias.
Yeah, we have to. This is a whole nother. This is a whole nother philosophical Friday.
Absolutely.
All on its own.
But I want to mention that bias because as we're talking about poker influencers, this is probably going to come out, and you're both going to realize my bias is that I do not consider, and I want to repeat that, I do not consider anything crypto-based as investable. It's extremely, it can be extremely utilized. It's extremely useful. But for me, the only way that something is investable if it itself can produce other things over time, right? Produce assets of its own. That's just my disclaimer so that people know where I'm coming from. So a lot of things I'm going to say, I'm going to be with that in mind. So,
all right.
Okay, so let's start with some of basic definitions. How in the world of social media and the internet explosion, what do we consider to be poker influencers, and what do we think is their role in today's environment?
I mean, an influencer, I think like it's going to depend on the scale of, but in general, it's someone who can influence other people with their opinion, right? I told you just briefly before we turned on the recording that I was influenced by people that I respect to buy something that may help me sleep better at night, right? So they directly influenced me because I respect their opinion. So basically, it's a human being who you respect and you value how they view the world, you value their opinions, their thoughts, and with that, they're able to influence your behavior in some way when they promote some kind of thing that has added value to their lives. So basically, they can just influence you. Pretty cut and dry. You're not supposed to use a definition in the word in the definition, right? But
right. No, you're basically saying it's an action reaction thing, right? They're starting an action that will cause a reaction to you. Essentially, that's what you're saying.
It's an outsourcing, right? Yeah. It's like, I could take the time to educate myself on something. However, because I respect and trust this human being, I'm outsourcing that to them and just trusting that they know what they're talking about.
Right. You're giving them that power.
Sure.
And I would say that this is actually very important that you mentioned that, because when we're going to talk about morality and ethics and responsibilities towards the end, that's going to play an important role. So on the one hand, somebody may argue we have the influencers, But on the other hand, we have the influencees, so people who, knowingly accept that they're going to be influenced by outside sources. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's already a point of responsibility, right? That
Sure.
we should come up later. So
Yeah, and
people who,
imagine the early 90s before GPS. You're
right,
lost, you stop at a gas station, you ask somebody for directions, you're outsourcing
right,
that to this person and trusting they know what they're talking about
right.
when they provide you with, the instructions of, if you hit the pothole, then you've gone too far and turn around.
Absolutely. And then it's going to be an interesting situation if they're wrong, right? I mean, then we can
Sure.
talk morality, and we will talk morality because we love to do that. So how has their role changed with the expansion of the internet? Like, how have influencers changed? How their power has changed? How's the role of people who are listening to them has changed?
I would say the internet has really just given more people a vehicle to be influencers, right? There's spaces carved out where people can, be an expert on a specific topic, and then their audience listens, and then they can outsource what they need to know about that topic to the expert in question. So like the internet's just given people platforms, a lot of different people platforms, whether it's YouTube, podcast, Instagram, Twitter, just blogs, daily newsletters. There's just all kinds of, micro and macro influencers across the board.
Absolutely. And that makes it so much easier, which means um, now people don't necessarily control the impact some of the things they say have, like for instance, to make a joke, but not really. Allegedly, the most popular tweet that has ever been made was by Elon Musk talking about putting cocaine back in Coke, So, I mean, I personally find that hilarious, even though I'm not particularly necessarily a big fan of Elon Musk, but, this can be, who knows
I thought
how.
you were going to say cocaine, but now I see. I'm not a super big fan of Elon Musk. Cocaine though, that's a different story. I'm
Absolutely.
a huge fan.
Brad, you know very well I cannot handle coffee, let alone anything stronger than that, right? So I'm already hyper as it is. So let's stay off hard drugs. Good point though. But the point is, a statement like that, depending on who you ask, depending on who's listening, and I don't want to, I'm very open when it comes to things like that. I'm like, everything goes, but that can actually hurt a specific, a young kid who misinterprets that. Who knows what, like people thinking now that cocaine is cool, and because Elon Musk says it, who knows how it can be interpreted, right? So
Sure.
the point is, people say stuff, and we have no idea, how many people these things are going to reach, and it becomes out of control. That is not to say that we should put a barrier to their freedom of speech, or we should put necessarily a filter to what they're saying. But at least we need to acknowledge that some of these things can easily get out of control. I'm not saying it's an easily solvable problem. I would actually say let them say more, so that at least we can judge by ourselves. But that's a different story. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there's so many different media these days, and can you give us like a few examples? I mean, let's start with the elephant in the room, right? What are some examples of modern influencers, things that influenced in the poker world?
Well, I mean, obviously, like Doug is the big one. That's the elephant in the room, and the intended real topic of conversation. But I think that, yeah, like it's
for the listener who may not know, right? Because like not everybody's on Twitter, like 24/7. What was
Doug was the CoinFlex ambassador, and CoinFlex was, I believe it was an exchange, but they had a stable coin, and it guaranteed if you basically kept your Bitcoin with them, then you got, I believe it was like 4 or 9% API interest on said Bitcoin over the course of a year. In the same way that, there's been a lot of these that have tanked in the past month or so. Celsius, I believe, is another one. Luna crashed and burned. Which, by the way, as an aside, these platforms crashing, watched a it's a series on Netflix called The G Word with Adam Conover about the
Mhm,
government.
mhm.
And actually, the FDIC, which is the entity that minimizes the impact of banks failing. Because surprisingly, and I didn't really know this until I watched that episode, banks fail even today somewhat
Mhm,
regularly.
mhm.
When a bank name changes, that typically means that something happened. And the FDIC basically, they're so streamlined at protecting the public these days that they can swoop in,
That's right.
and you don't your bank can change names and you have no idea your debit card works, your money's there,
That's right.
everything's safe and secure. So I just want to state that for the record that like even banks today change, even banks today fail, which was a big thing that happened, during the Great Depression, and why the FDIC is a thing anyway was to protect the public from, a bank just, being over leveraged, there being
Right.
a run, and them just tanking and people's life savings being instantly destroyed. That's why so many people after the Great Depression kept all their money in a mattress under their bed.
Absolutely. Both the Great Depression and the Great Recession, right? Both the Great Depression of the 30s and the Great Recession of the 2008, right? I mean, that was exactly right. Like people had, if it wasn't for the banks to come in and bail, if it wasn't for the government to come in and bail out banks, would have been in an explosion of a financial situation. Nobody knows exactly what would have happened. And you're
Sure.
absolutely correct. And the not only not only they those liabilities that sometimes, when you say banks change names, I mean they have liabilities in general. When a company goes bankrupt, um, basically you say um, to the lenders, sorry, the best we can do, maybe we can make you shareholders of the new company if they merge from chapter 11 bankruptcy and so on and so forth. But what happens sometimes, you basically say, sorry, you're not going to see your money back. But with banks, it's a little bit different because the banking system is so interconnected. If you say that, essentially what's going to be translated into is going to be that, you and me and our bank accounts and, like an
It's
average
not
Joe,
safe.
it's not
Yeah.
safe. Exactly. They're not going to get the money. So that's why sometimes when you see FDIC insured for the first quarter $1 million or $500,000, whatever it is, that's exactly what it means. That basically the government steps in and then essentially moves the liability. I'm oversimplifying here, but the liability is being assumed by somebody else.
Yeah.
So that liability is not lost in limbo.
And
So
so I guess I wanted to go down that avenue just because, exchanges failing is not like a thing that doesn't happen. A banking system and crypto fail. It's not a thing that this happens in regular banks and in regular world all the time. The difference is the FDIC doesn't protect crypto exchanges,
that's
or
right.
stablecoin when they crash, right? There's no protection there for, the people who invest their money with said platform.
Correct. And let me say one more thing about this. By the way, for anybody who wants to learn more about those things and all the so-called stable coins, there's no such thing as stable coins. I stand by my words here. You didn't hear it. You didn't hear it here first, but you heard it here from me. So I'm going to say that again. There's no such thing as stable coin. But if you want to learn more about that stuff, there's a gentleman by the name of Patrick Boyle who explains these ideas very, very nicely on YouTube. Google his name. He's really funny too. You can learn a lot of things. But one of the things specifically about the idea of stablecoin, a lot of people thought that keeping your money on stablecoin, for those of you who know nothing about crypto, is essentially an idea that you tie a cryptocurrency to an actual fiat currency. Two things. Number one, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And when something promises you to give you like 4 to 9% or whatever it is that they promised to give you per year, there's a reason for that. It means there's inherent risk. Nothing gives money unless there's risk inside. Number two, what is that risk? Part of the idea of why the stablecoin is because essentially all of that in quotes, is because people thought that we can create a system where we will give an incentive for people to actually create something which is akin to arbitrage. In other words, if the coin, the actual coin, the crypto coin, loses its value, we will give them an incentive to buy more of that. And vice versa, if it gets too expensive, to buy less of that so that it can give it in one-to-one correspondence with the actual fiat currency. But the problem is, anytime you deal with supply and demand, and anytime you deal with, I need somebody to buy in order for this, or I need somebody to sell in order for this to maintain a certain fixed value, you have the so-called thing, a spiral of death, where this thing can grow out of control. Nobody has endless purchasing power. So when things get at insane ratios, when one or the other crashes, it's impossible for that to be at one-to-one correspondence. So when you don't have collateral behind it, this can happen. We saw that happening with Terra. We saw that. I mean, I don't keep track of those things, because just to me, like I said, it doesn't make any sense to me. There's no need to hold stable coin unless you need it for your day to day. So I personally, like I've mentioned that multiple times, but this is something to keep in mind. There's no such thing as a stable anything when it comes, especially something that gives you 9% return a year.
Yeah. And another thing too for Bitcoin neophytes out there, like if you don't own your keys, then you don't own the Bitcoin. And
Correct.
So whenever you do, deposit Bitcoin or lend out Bitcoin to an exchange like this, whether it be Celsius or anything else,
correct,
that's not your Bitcoin.
Correct.
That's
Very
not
good.
yours anymore. And so it can disappear, and there's nothing that you can do about it. And this was, there was talk in Greatness Village about Celsius, and
that happened, I believe, early on in what it was MTG Mountain, I believe it was back in 2012 when that happened for the first time. It was an exchange that I forget the exact name.
Mount Gox.
Mountain something. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, Mount Gox. But yeah, basically, like if you have your Bitcoin on Coinbase, you don't own your Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Your Bitcoin is owned by Coinbase. It is there, right? So if they get hacked for all of their Bitcoin, it is not yours. That's why you have, cold storage wallets, and you really have to protect yourself against these types of things, because you're dealing with companies and businesses, and it's just things can go south very, very, very quickly. So anybody that's a neophyte thinking that like, oh, I just leave my money here on Coinbase, you are risking that money. That money is at risk. And in this space, crazy things happen all the time that you would imagine aren't going to happen. And so you have to be prepared for the worst.
Absolutely. And these are questions, by the way, for neophytes or anybody else. This is sort of like the consumer's responsibility. These are questions we need to ask as consumers before we even get involved, let alone invest in anything like that, right? I mean, this is very important. So
sure. And I mean, before the FDIC, like, you invest your money at the bank, well, and then the bank lends out the money, it's not really your money, right? Like, and if there's a run on the bank and the bank fails, well, you don't have any money, right? So, which is why people stuck it under their mattress.
That's right. So, and it's real. And actually, speaking of, and it's nice that we're talking about this, because we need to give some perspective in the situation that happened in Greece too recently, fairly recently, when the financial crisis, some of you may be aware, was on the news around 2010. But even later than that, when there was a really huge crisis with the government and not having enough money to cover pensions and things like that, people did a run in the bank, and actually the governments did not allow people to withdraw more than a certain amount per day. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that you go to the bank and the bank tells you, and actually the amount for Americans is going to sound ridiculous. It was something like 400 euros, which translates around to today's money, I mean, about $500 a day limit. Can you imagine that, going to your bank account and tells you cannot withdraw more than $500, right? So nothing is, as safe as it may seem.
Yeah. Biggest news story coming out of Greece since the first Olympics. There. So there's my shot on Greece for the day.
I love it. You're being too kind. I would have been much worse. Yeah, so
now there's Giannis. So
yes, Giannis. Absolutely. So some other examples also, we've seen a lot of people promoting different coins. I mean, famously, Phil Hellmuth used his Latinum. And,
I don't even know what Bitcoin Latinum is. And I think, maybe. So originally, I think the scope of this was too about the responsibility of promoting just anything. We're getting like very crypto specific. So maybe like we'll just rein this into crypto only for now, because I think there is, um, yeah, it is on the table to talk about all the things that people can promote outside of
Correct.
crypto too.
Just so can be fair, very quickly, just to interrupt you there for just a second. This thing has been there for a long time. Like if we go back to the full tilt era, there was a lot of promotion and a lot of people. That type of outsourcing happened there too, right? I mean, a
Sure.
lot of professionals were saying, I play there too, you go play there too, and a lot of us, our responsibility. I'm not taking any responsibility away from me, but like we in some sense we trusted them even though we shouldn't have.
Yeah, I
And that's on
mean,
us. But that
it's
has
human. It's
sure,
humanity,
sure,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Humanity's influenced each other like all throughout the course of human history. It's just a thing that happens.
That's actually a good segue. Is it inherently bad to promote anything? And if so, where do we draw the line? What do you think, Brad?
No, it's not inherently bad. I think like I see it a lot. Like a lot of poker players love like shitting on shills or shitting on people that promote something. But I mean, the reality is like for someone like me, if I experience something in my life and it adds value, and I'm educated on the business, the infrastructure, the people, all these things, then it would almost it would almost be ridiculous for me to be like, no, I'm not going to promote anything, even though I think this thing can add lots of value to your lives, listener. No, I'm not going to tell you about it. I mean,
Right,
that just seems absurd to me.
right. No, I agree. I mean, again, I mean, it would contradict my, my thoughts on the other topics. But I think people can say honestly, I would take it one step further, and I would say people can say whatever they want at any
I
point.
know. Yeah,
Yeah, like I would take it
that's
once.
your
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, and my personal philosophy is that I want to protect my audience. That's the
Mhm.
most important. Well, that's the most important thing for my business, right? And for me,
Absolutely,
and support. And so, like, burning your audience is just a really good way to not have an audience
absolutely.
for very long and to lose that influence and trust that you've built up over time in the people that listen to you.
Absolutely. But just to be fair, what you're describing right now is internal, right? I mean, you say
Sure,
how
it is
you would do,
internal.
right?
Yep.
What I'm talking about is more external that applies
Sure.
to everybody, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
you need to have an ethical code. I do too, right? I mean, when I'm saying that people can say anything is because I know I disagree with a lot of people. So
Sure.
if I create the ways that the world is going to create rules in this external discussion that we're having, however I want to see the world to be, it will be very similar to how I am, and I don't want that. I want it to be fair, right? So I want other people who I disagree with to be able to express their opinions. But that
Sure.
doesn't mean that internally we shouldn't have an ethical code that actually allows us to say or not say certain things.
And there is a natural mechanism in place that if you are Bernie Madoff, right,
Right.
like obviously there's downside to what he did,
Absolutely.
and there's consequences
Correct.
to doing such things, right?
Which
So
is also external, by the way, the consequences, because the problem is with somebody like Bernie Madoff, he's a psychopath, and a psychopath is important. They cannot feel empathy. So there's no way we can convince somebody like Bernie Madoff to change because it's not in his brain chemistry. It cannot, like psychopaths
sure,
do not have the capabilities of being able to be
yeah,
nice to people, and that's okay. That's how reality is. So we need some sort of like an external mechanisms, and that's why the outcry, or like having a system in place that can actually fight back. And usually, in my opinion, that's the outcry of the people. The people should go and scream as far as they can, and they should protest, and they should take this guy for everything that he has, send him to jail, and he can die there for all I care. Which,
yeah, and
right,
the consequences for like Madoff is like his son killed himself, right? And
right,
people killed themselves, and like that was a very just terrible thing
right,
that kind of all spawned from one person that just didn't care about anything really.
exactly. And he couldn't
Um,
care. That's the point.
yeah,
This
he,
is very
he
important.
could he couldn't care about
He couldn't
anything,
care,
which
right?
is
Again, we're talking
even
about psychopathy,
scarier.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the psychopathy. I once had a student, that's one of the who was very intelligent. He was like a 17-year-old and super intelligent, very um, um, he was go-getter. He was like an overachiever and an excellent personality. He said, Duncan, one of my visions is so that we at some point we can unify the human race, and we can find the good in all people. And I remember thinking to myself, you are incredibly talented and incredibly naive. We cannot expect, even though this is an excellent, this is something that I disagree with a lot of people about. Like it's an excellent way to think about being unified and singing Kumbaya. But the fact of the matter is that evil exists, and we have to account for it. We cannot pretend that we can turn evil into good. So whatever system we put into place, we have to account for evil and how to deal with it.
Yeah,
Right?
interestingly, evil is also a construct that is somewhat recently been created to
yeah, absolutely.
as well, you know.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh man, this philosophical Friday is getting awfully philosophical for me. So, you know, basically throughout human history, I think that like that concept of like good and evil just really hasn't been a thing until recent memory, maybe the rise of Christianity. I'm not exactly sure when or why it came about, but yeah, like I need to educate myself. Maybe let's chunk this for another week on the good and evil philosophical debate, because like for something to be, it's actually like both words need to be talked about, because they kind of work off of each other. Like whenever something is like inherently good, the absence of said good, just basically going against that moral code, is what we describe as evil. So there needs to be some code that we defy. So anyway.
Absolutely. And let me propose this. So we can do an episode, we can call it Good and versus Evil. Another episode, we can call it Beyond Good and Evil, for any gamers out there. So this is...
well, why don't we just simplify it? You know, Brad versus Duncan. That's the...
We all know who the evil one is here.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I love it.
All right. So excellent. Back to the topic at hand.
Absolutely. So again, we were talking about whether or not it's inherently bad to promote anything, and we both agree it is not. But let's come to the meat and potatoes, right? I mean, what are the responsibilities of influencers, if any, and how, if at all, should we hold them accountable, if at all? And what does that even mean, accountability and responsibility?
Yeah, like, I can only speak from my personal perspective, right? Because I think this is
that's what we're here for.
All just like based on our own personal code of morality and integrity and our own personal belief system. So I think that like our values will affect this quite deeply. And give me back on track, because I just lost my train of thought completely.
What is the responsibility that influencers have?
The responsibility. So in my mind, my goal is to add value to people's lives with things that I promote, right? Things like that. That's really what it boils down to for me, is like my responsibility is to take care of the people listening to me. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want you to have a bad life experience. I don't want to put you in a negative position. I don't want something down the line to come back and bite you and your family. So like, to me, my value is just protecting the listener from the downside of anything that I recommend, right? Like that would be my personal responsibility. But there's also responsibility to your business, right? Like, let's be real here as it relates to businesses. They need revenue, like, to survive. You know, I know it's shocking to the listener right now, but I have to eat. My family has to eat. I have to pay my bills. And so like that money has to come from somewhere. And so that's where like typically it's sponsorship from some outside source. And, you know, you can either accept or decline said sponsorship based on whether or not it aligns with your personal values and integrity. Like that to me is how my brain works on this.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. The only thing that I would replace, only because, again, I'm afraid I'm going to sound too arrogant, I would replace the word protection, because I don't think I can protect anybody. I would replace that word with skin in the game. So
I would say it's protecting me, honestly.
Okay.
It's protecting my emotions and my feelings, because I would feel upset
That makes sense.
in the instance that somebody gets hurt. So like, really, it's just selfish. it's
No, no,
it's
no, no.
protecting myself, right?
Yeah, and also to be honest, like again, just to push a little bit further, it's so difficult, to know what we control about what can hurt people. Like even
Sure.
if you're trying to protect yourself, I mean, people can misinterpret what you just said or the things that you discussed in so many different ways, and ultimately what um you can send air and then they receive fire, right? I mean, you sent air and somehow they received fire. So what they receive is like completely out of your control at some point. How they
Sure.
did the big alchemy. And because
Yeah.
again, we don't know what goes inside people's brains. And that is a
And I
problem.
don't care about that.
Yeah,
That is beyond my control.
right.
Like when somebody comments on a video or comments on a tweet or sends me a message just with something that's clearly picking a fight and attacking me as a person, like I don't care about that
Right.
because that's their interpretation of what I said. And for whatever reason, based on their life experience, it triggered them in such a way where they got angry and lashed out to me. Right. So like, it's not even in me to say you're wrong because that's how you feel. So that's how you feel. But if it's contrary to the spirit of what I was saying, because I'm aware of the spirit of the words that are coming out of my mouth and I know what I'm getting at, basically, then like that makes me feel just nothing when somebody attacks me in that way. Um, and to be fair, though, if something's criticizing and they're right, then that's going to cause me to reflect and think about it and try to learn from that criticism. But personal attacks, they just not really going to affect me these days. There was a time, a few years ago that probably they would, but these days it's like, whatever.
Absolutely. And you're in a situation where basically the law of large numbers, they're going to create a lot of personal attacks, right? Like I often joke with my wife, when somebody cuts us off while we're driving, I say there's nothing you can do about the bottom 5% of the drivers in the population. There's absolutely nothing you can do. Like it doesn't matter how you change the rules. There's always going to be the bottom 5% of the drivers. How do they drive that way? Well, how there is a bottom 5%. I mean, it's not 95% total. It's 100%. There's always going to be a bottom 5%, no matter what you do. And sometimes I joke, when Jordan Peterson says, if we could, increase our IQs by 15 points each, how much better things we could do. But then it's like, you still forget that there's going to be people, unfortunately, at the bottom of that percentile, and they're going to feel as isolated as they are now. It doesn't matter if you increase the average, as long as there's going to be a bottom of any population on any circumstances, they're going to feel the pain. Similarly, you're attracting all of these negative comments because there's going to be a bottom 5% of, misinterpreters, if you will, that is going to...
We're just people in pain who are suffering and
I'm
want
not
to
judging.
lash out at somebody, That's the...
I'm bottom 5% in sports. I'm not judging, like it's, everybody is, bottom 5% somewhere. I'm not judging. That's the reality of it. Let's face it. If we want to think all that we're like Pollyannas and we're princesses and we're great, I mean, that's fine. People can think however much they want. It's just, we all suck somewhere. It's okay.
Yes, very, very, very much so. And there was one YouTube comment that kind of sprang to my mind just now, and it was on a Tactical Tuesday episode, and somebody commented on YouTube that the coach is so patronizing to his student and talks down to him, and I don't know how he takes it to be so calm. And I read it, I reflected on it, and I messaged John and I told him that he just really needed to stop being such a fucking idiot so that I'd be less patronizing to him moving forward, But you can see a lot in that comment where like it's coming from a place. It's coming from a place of somebody that has they have internal things as it relates to authority, and they're projecting that onto the situation. Whereas, me and John, we just laugh at it and we're like, that's funny, because we know each other quite well. And, I know how much John can take and when the right time to poke is and when the right time isn't. But anyway, it's just, I thought that's a good example of somebody just misinterpreting or projecting their own views of authority onto something else that, like, why should I take that personally? Because it's most likely not even about me,
Right. You're absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. So, so when it comes to accountability, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I had a question. You said some wonderful things, and I had a question. So, do you think, um, and this is more like a feel question, so to speak. How do you feel? Like, because obviously, I mean, we haven't done any scientific research on the subject,
Sure.
but do you think when people come out with and they promote things in a vacuum in general,
Hmm.
do you think more often than not, and you can give us perhaps a percentage, do you think they have good intentions, bad intentions, somewhere between? What do you think they lie for the most part? Because you said earlier that I would want to make sure that what I would promote it again. Uh,
In
and
general,
I'm paraphrasing, right?
yeah.
You
Gut.
don't want to hurt your audience, of course. You're
Yep.
going to do
Yep.
your own due diligence, try to give the best quality. Um,
That's a great question. It's a great question, Duncan. I would say, in general, they have good intentions. And the reason why is that the incentives align in such that they should have good intentions. If somebody has a giant audience, generally, it's because they're caring and they care about their audience and they respect them and they want to help them, right? Like it's hard to build audiences if you don't like the person that's listening to you talk, right? It's inauthentic. People see through it. It's just, yeah. So to me, I would imagine, and again, it's not scientific, but
Yeah, no, you feel, yeah.
based on how I feel, I think most people probably have good intentions at influencers as it relates to their audience. Because
Right.
to have bad intentions is just, yeah, there's consequences that destroy your whole audience, and then you don't have an audience anymore. So if somebody's able to like make it to build a giant audience, like Oprah, for instance,
Right.
she probably genuinely cares about her audience.
I believe so too, and I would say also, like another indicator is that there's not many psychopaths in the world. Like, it's about like 1 to 2% of the population. So that we don't have like many people who don't feel empathy. So most people do feel empathy. So it's very difficult to do something. And I would actually double down on what you said. I've been very critical of people like Howard Lederer and Chris Ferguson because I've been on the other side of things, and I've said, but specifically for Chris Ferguson, I should also say, and for those of you who are younger, these were people heavily involved in the Full Tilt fiasco and the fact that we were stiffed for a lot of money back in the day, and we eventually ended up getting it after 2.5 years. But that's a different story. If it wasn't for PokerStars, we never have
The
seen
fact that you have to qualify that, by the way, actually shows that like mechanisms in place have to be working some, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. But what I wanted to say, though, however, is that I do believe, honestly, I do believe that Chris Ferguson had good intentions. Like I really do
Absolutely.
believe.
I think
Yeah.
so too.
And that being said, I still personally, and then it gets personal opinion, I still wanted to see him punished. Like personally, like my personal opinion would be to completely
Yeah,
be completely banned for any event. And the reason for that, I'm going to be very very clear why I want that, is because if I screwed up royally as he did, I wanted the same to happen to me. And the reason for that is I want a system that basically discards the failures and encourages those who succeed. So if somebody screws as monumentally as they did, so be it. There's going to be other people who are going to say, like, that's how life is. Like, life is not about necessarily giving us second chances. I'm very pragmatic when it comes to those things. I'm not very Pollyanna like in these kind of things. If you fail that miserably, get out of there. And I would say the same thing about the banks that you mentioned earlier, except that if the banks were not bailed out, the pain would have been transferred in the wrong places. Like, people would have suffered instead of the bankers themselves. Right? That's the real problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, just want to admit, I agree with you 100%.
To be fair, at least to Chris Ferguson, I mean, I guess the Full Tilt people is that like PokerStars did pay out a lot of the money with Full Tilt, if not all the money, to my recollection of the situation. So, PokerStars actually picked up the bill for Full Tilt. And so like, yeah, in the difference between like people that lost everything in this situation, at least poker players did get paid some.
Yes, but we need to remind ourselves that we were not made whole, even though we got our money. There's
True.
something to be said about the value of money, and at the same time, some of us irresponsible people at the time, we had a lot of of our bankroll tied up in online games, right? So that makes a lot of difference. So there is damages there,
Yeah, I
not
mean,
as quite as big as like completely losing the money.
yeah, there's a saying, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions,
Exactly.
and so there you go.
So how do we like, because this is actually a difficult problem. If we, on the one hand, the reason why I'm asking this question, on the one hand, we believe people have good intentions, but on the other hand, the fact of the matter is that reality is not Hollywood. Reality is going to slap us in the face twice as hard as we anticipate, and sometimes 20 times as hard, and sometimes there's no limit on how hard it's going to slap us in the face. So how do we hold ourselves first and foremost accountable, and others accountable for inevitable screw ups like that if they have good intentions?
Oh man, what a loaded question. How do we hold them accountable? Like, ah, I don't know. Give me your thoughts, because that question to me is it's so complex. I think there's this natural layer of accountability, like I mentioned with Ferguson and Lederer,
Right.
in that they're kind of outcasts from the poker world, from a world that was their life,
Right.
right? Let's be real here. Poker was their entire life.
Right.
And to be ostracized from that community, to show up at a table and have people just angry at you everywhere you go, and to be recognizable at any poker room in the world, I mean,
Mhm.
that's a large penalty you know for messing up. Um, but outside of like the natural penalty, I'm not exactly sure. Like, people lose trust in you, people lose faith. You lose your ability to be in the circles that you want to be in. You lose your ability to pursue things that you're passionate about. All of that is significant downside to that specific human. But I don't know how you make the people who they hurt whole. I don't know if there is a way, right? It's just like, um, just what is the saying? Is it like revenge is, um revenge is like
There's
taking poison at night and then hoping the other person dies, or
right, right,
something along those lines. But like, basically, there's pain here, and it doesn't matter. That pain is never going to be whole, no matter what. So
absolutely. And I think first things first, the reason why we're struggling with making a valid proposal here is because this is a very complex matter, right? I
sure.
mean, humans are involved, and you show that. You show you understand the complexity and the difficulty of the issue. Anybody who would say, "Oh, the solution is very simple," they're lying to themselves, because we're talking about moral issues that plague the humanity for a long, long time, right? I mean, on
And
the one,
yeah, and as soon as you know a- as soon as Ferguson like does an interview and talks about it, he opens himself up for further liability,
absolutely,
right? So there's like significant downside to even contrition, to even apologizing to the people that he affected, and that
absolutely.
I'm sure he's getting legal advice from every which angle. And so I don't like, does Ferguson like want to apologize but can't? I don't know,
Right.
but I'm not going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
And I think that's what I wanted to add to the conversation. I mean, we may not know what the answer is, but at the very least, one thing that I feel it's in the right direction is, do not try to protect any person who has screwed up, right? I mean, because sometimes humanity comes in and they say, but they had good intention. It's irrelevant. To me, it's completely irrelevant. Like, sometimes these things happen, you screw up and you end up killing yourself by the screw up. You cannot, sometimes, like, that idea of adding, like, that helping hand, I think that's incredibly, incredibly, incredibly naive, and it protects people from feeling the full repercussions of their actions. And sometimes I understand that's bad luck, that's variance, and I understand that fully, and that's problematic. But I think, as a very first step, you know we should be incredibly understanding, but not offering a helping hand to people who screwed up in that way. Like, let them feel, and let us feel, when we screw up, the full force of our actions. That would be my. But that goes both ways, right? I mean, if you are allowed to say whatever you want at any point, you should be ready to accept all consequences. So I'm going full strength on both directions here. I'm trying to be, consistent, right? I truly believe people can say whatever they want, but they should absolutely have no protection when they screw up. They should not just try to grab onto little, pockets of hope here and there. But guys, I'm sorry, I'm human, I make mistakes. It's irrelevant. I understand, but it's irrelevant, right? If your actions, cause my wife to suffer, we're gonna feel the wrath of me, and I don't care how regretful you are, and I can understand it. I could have been in your position myself. I could have made the same mistake you did. I still don't care, because in the end of the day, what matters is the actions. All that matters is the actions. And if a certain action could cause other people to hurt, we got to protect ourselves, right? And I think that's something that this country does really well, with like letting people, first of all, the freedom of speech, and also the idea that they let people, protect against tyrannical governments. And I know this is like the Second Amendment is a political. I'm not talking about the Second Amendment necessarily, but I'm talking about the idea that people can actually protect themselves. That's a beautiful idea that has helped this country for a very long time. Protect yourself against all means if you are being threatened, right?
Yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's a very difficult subject. I'm not saying it's easy.
It's like Aunt May and Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly.
So you have to be careful about how you wield that power and influence. And anyway, just for the full tilt thing, there were thousands of adverts all the time across all media channels promoting full tilt poker. And I mean, so yeah, they don't get let off the hook because the reality is what happened. And that's it,
But in the case of Chris Ferguson, for example, as I've mentioned before, he was in 2017 World Series of Poker, right? I mean, he was, and his picture was there. And I think this is the type of protection that I do not want to see, right? But to be fair, again, I'm talking about my personal opinion, but to be fair, people are also not allowed to say whatever they want, right? So I think the system is working really well the way it is, right? I mean, again, so that for my consistency, I'm saying that people should say whatever they want, but also get no protection. But in actuality, people cannot say whatever they want, and they get a little bit of protection. So the system is sort of balanced.
I am okay. So like, so I think that the powers that be don't always care so much about the poker players, or care even very little about the players. And this is something that's like, Berkey's been banging the drums at Poker News because of Ollie and Jake and Bryn and the WSOP and their coverage, right?
Right.
And to me, what it boils down to is that, like, the powers that be, the WSOP, or Poker News or whoever, I think that they don't really care about the poker community, the people that are there. Because if they did, then they would take it upon themselves to take action as it relates to, like, Ferguson and playing in WSOP tournaments, right? Like, if they genuinely cared about the market, well, then Ferguson wouldn't play, right? And in any other sport, in any other sport, anybody who's plagued in scandal, anything that they do, the first thing when there's a report on them is, player X, Y, or Z, who's mired in personal scandal, and then they go on with the story, right? Because it matters. Basically, like ESPN with like Deshaun Watson or whatever. I mean, and then there's this whole other angle of like, yeah, they click through that and they get more clicks. They go through the stories or whatever. But anyway, I don't know, man. Berkey made a tweet about Poker Bunny because Poker News hadn't reported on Poker Bunny because Poker Bunny apparently got antagonistic towards a reporter, and so they hadn't like approached her, right? Which is fair game, right? You treat somebody poorly like that, or you're antagonistic for whatever reason, or you rub somebody the wrong, whatever it is, right? Like, okay, so this person's, there's more downside into reporting than not reporting, so they don't. They're personally incentivized there, though, right? And that's the point. They're personally incentivized because they felt the pain, but they didn't feel the pain of what Bryn did. They don't feel the pain of what Schindler did. They don't feel the pain of what Ollie did or allegedly did, right?
Sure.
And that's the point, is because they don't personally feel it. It appears as if it matters less.
Right.
And that is where I think as an industry, we could do better.
That's a very good point.
That's just my opinion. And Chad Holloway's been on CPG,
I love Chad. Yeah.
And Sarah Herring and all those people who I really, really like personally. But
and once again, we need to remember, right? I mean, person in the system, different things. Person and a company, different things, right? I mean, again, you can have. I mean, I love Upswing Poker. I write articles there all the time. Mike Brady, Doug Polk. These are people I very much respect. Now, I mean, when they come to the news, we can discuss about things they've done, and they can discuss about things we've done. I mean, it's perfectly fine. It doesn't change anything.
We were supposed to talk about CoinFlex situation.
We did a lot. What else
you want? I don't remember. I don't remember at this point. I think to me, as it relates to influencers, right? Like whenever it's all about the outsourcing thing. So like the listener of CPG outsources. They outsource my knowledge, my testimonial to a specific product, right? They take that, they don't research it, they buy it, etc. Right? In the same way that other influencers, the same thing happens. And when it comes to these companies that are promoted or the products or whatever it is, said influencer really is outsourcing their research to the company or to the other people that have a personal relationship to these company, right? So like both places are doing the same thing. So when you say like, oh, the person who made a CoinFlex account and put their money in there, like they should have done their due diligence. They should have done their research. Like they should have known that this was a scam and or that this was going to fall apart, whatever. Well, I would say yes, that I would agree with that. But I would also say that Doug did the same thing as it relates to the research and the internal stuff. He outsourced that to other people that he trusted. So like an influencer influenced him in the same way. And so like it can't be that like the end user is only at fault here.
And to add to that, I agree with that. And actually, I would agree with everything up to the point they should have known that this is a scam. Nobody knows anything about the future. I mean, even though I'm a big advocate against treating cryptocurrency as an investment, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know whether it would crash. I mean, Warren Buffett said it adamantly. This thing is going to be worthless a few days from now. Nassim Taleb says it's worth zero today. I would not make those statements like that. First of all, there's utility, and second of all, nobody knows. Nobody can predict the future. Nobody knows. But I agree with you. Like they have the responsibility. And the only thing that I would add is that they're as much influencers as people are influencees. So it does and the only thing I would remove the idea of who's at fault, because I just feel that there's not a universal metric by which we can all agree to assign blame. But if somebody wants to be angry at whoever you want. And I think it's a
the person at fault is like the first domino in this whole equation, right? Like the Madoff scam, I would say, well, Bernie Madoff is ultimately at fault. However,
difficult though. You know why it's difficult, right?
I know
instinctively I want to agree with you, but the problem is, how about all the people who promoted him? How about all the people who actually thought that it was possible, for things to go up at 1% a year without any kings? Allegedly, the whistleblower, a Greek guy, by the way, that's why I know he is a whistleblower. Allegedly, he looked at these charts for 15 minutes and he knew it was a Ponzi scheme in 15 minutes. Now, that doesn't mean that you should actually, be as good as he is, because that was his job. But how about the responsibility of all the other people surrounding him? How about the neurons that make Bernie Madoff a psychopath? How about his parents? How about I know I sound far-fetched, and I'm telling you that I'm inclined to agree with you that he's at fault, because according to the practical, intrinsic, if you will, not extrinsic way that I see things, if you were to ask, okay, would you check that he's at fault or he's not at fault? Which one seems more intuitive? I would say, yes, he's at fault. But if we look deeper, our instincts might be wrong on this one.
Well, yeah, I guess we'd have to have like a faultometer and dilute it down as it like assign percentages of fault to everybody, like in the space of said situation.
I had people who argued to me, well, Duncan, you cannot do everything mathematically. So we say, like, you cannot assign a formula to everything. So there's this argument that they're basically telling me we can't even do that, right? I mean, we cannot even assign. And I know you're joking, of course, but I'm saying that there's people who think that. No, go ahead.
I'm joking some, but I do think that like fault does get diluted as it goes down through the different chains of people, where like some people have so much more knowledge about a situation than people downstream. And so like 3 levels down, that person who has much less information to go on, but trust the people at the other layers, their fault gets diluted basically from an initial source. Right. And I guess what you're saying is that it's hard to pinpoint the source. Right?
Exactly.
It's the neurons. It's the neurons. We'll blame the neurons. You know, we'll blame the parents of Bernie Madoff for procreating on a specific day and time.
Right. I mean, there was an entire floor they had. Right. I mean, I'm actually very interested in that situation. They had an entire floor where basically they were getting the reports of the previous day. They were using them as they were using them as forecasts. So they actually were manipulating the data so that they seemed they could predict the future. And they were actually taking reports from previous dates. It was, and that there were employees who were doing that stuff. There were people who knew about that stuff. So it was, anyway, just it's a very, very, very complex. A lot of things. Yeah, people like to. When things go wrong, they like to point the fingers and make it, like super simple. It was that person.
It's never simple. Yeah. It's never simple. And for the record, I think, in my opinion, I think Doug has high integrity based on the things that he has done. But high integrity and fault are not mutually exclusive.
Correct. And you can screw the pooch. I mean, you can be part of you can say, you know what, you may not necessarily be, or we can't define who's the major person at fault, but you definitely have responsibility. And I would agree with that.
And you just have to accept the responsibility from the actions that you've taken. There's no way around it, right? And if you don't accept responsibility, there's natural consequences there too. So
I agree with you 100%. I mean, the moment we breathe, we should accept responsibility for actually, using the oxygen around us. I do believe that very much. Like the one thing that we cannot deny is responsibility, whatever that means, however that interpret. And if there's people completely mad at at influencers, what can you do?
Stop getting influenced, man. Make your own channel. Become the influencer.
So what we influence people on? So let's both influence people on something just for fun.
I'm gonna go see Thor, so I guess okay. I don't think that anybody needs any influence to go see the new Thor movie.
7.2, I believe. My wife and I checked, so that's not as good as
I know
Marvel rating has gone, but
I know watchable. Watchable. That's what I'm going for. We're going for watchable.
Spoiler alert! Should I mention a name? I probably should. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, it's part of the right. I know not what happens in the movie. I mean, who's in the movie? I mean, like a certain female character. That anyway. I'm not going to spoil.
What is happening right now?
I was talking about. Should I mention the name Natalie Portman? That was the spoiler, basically.
Well, why? I guess why would you, and then why wouldn't you?
Okay. I don't know. I'm excited. I'm excited about that fact. I mean, she's an excellent actress, and I never understood why she was. Anyway, it's just they cut her off there. So
all right. So Duncan's wife's gonna genuinely enjoy this episode. You two have a good date night watching Thor. You and your Natalie Portman. To influence people, greatnessvillage.com. Hop in there, ask questions to Duncan and I. Listen, subscribe to the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. I hope everybody enjoyed Philosophical Friday. Buy Duncan's book. All the regular things that we influence here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you can find us on the Twitters and the YouTubes and everywhere.
Yeah.
CPG podcast is Brad's Twitter account, and at Ask the Math DR is mine. Yeah, why Alex beats Bobby at poker. Bobby spelled Bobby.
And if anybody wants to make a Duncan and Natalie Portman meme and post it in Greatness Village, I would like to influence that. Just tag Duncan. Let's get them all going. It's going to be a fun time for everybody. See, I'm using my powers for good here, Duncan.
Absolutely. And the shaved version from V for Vendetta, like that's going to be cool. That's going to be Duncan has more hair than Natalie Portman. That's going to be the meme there.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right, man. Well,
it's been a pleasure, man.
Good time. Pleasure as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Absolutely. Take care.